Did you know that Hitler's greatest gamble led to his first catastrophic defeat? In 1941, Adolf Hitler launched the largest military invasion in history, Operation Barbarossa, aimed at crushing the Soviet Union and expanding Nazi control across Europe. With over 3 million troops, Hitler was confident in a swift victory. But what seemed like an unstoppable force quickly turned into a nightmare for the Nazis. Join us as we explore the turning point of World War II, where Hitler's grand ambitions met their first major defeat on the frozen fields of Russia. The cause of the campaign. Before the Barbarossa campaign, Adolf Hitler signed a non-aggression pact between Germany and the Soviet Union in 1939. However, he still strongly opposed Bolshevism. This event took place when World War II entered its second year. Hitler's concern about the Soviet Union increased after the Soviet Union occupied the Baltic countries, Bessarabia, and northern Bukovina in June 1940. This brought the Soviet army closer to the oil fields in Romania, an important supply source for Germany. Hitler's deep suspicion of Soviet leaders led to the decision to attack without waiting for the completion of the conquest of Western Europe, according to the original plan, but instead focus on dealing with the Soviet Union. Initially, Hitler and his generals planned to attack the Soviet Union in mid-May 1941. However, they had to invade Yugoslavia and Greece in April of that year, which was not anticipated, and forced them to postpone the campaign to the end of June. Although Hitler quickly achieved victory in the Balkan region, this delay shortened the preparation time for the invasion of the Soviet Union. This became even more important because the winter of 1941 in Russia came earlier than usual. Hitler and the senior leaders of the German High Command, including Commander-in-Chief Walter von Brauchitsch and Chief of Staff Franz Halder, believed that they could defeat the Red Army within 2 or 3 months. They hoped that by the end of October, the German army would control most of Europe from Arkhangelsk in the north to Astrakhan in the south. Initially, the invasion of the Soviet Union was called Plan Otto, then Operation Fritz, but when preparations began, Hitler renamed it Operation Barbarossa. The name comes from the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, who reigned from 1152 to 1190. Frederick Barbarossa was famous for his efforts to establish Germany's position in Europe. In the campaign against the Soviet Union, Germany deployed a large force, consisting of nearly 150 divisions with a total of about 3 million troops. Among them were 19 armored divisions, totaling about 3,000 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, and 2,500 aircraft. This marked the largest and strongest invading force to date. The strength of the German army was further enhanced by over 30 Allied divisions from Finland and Romania. Although the Soviet Union possessed double or triple the number of tanks and aircraft compared to Germany, most of their aircraft were outdated. Only the Soviet tanks could match the quality of the German tanks. A major mistake of Germany was underestimating the Soviet Union's ability to mobilize reserve forces. Germany estimated that the Soviet Union only had about 150 divisions in the West and believed that only an additional 50 divisions could be mobilized. However, in mid-August, the Soviet Union deployed over 200 new divisions, bringing the total to 360 divisions. Although the German army initially succeeded in defeating the Soviet forces due to superior tactics, they later faced strong resistance from the new Soviet forces. Additionally, a significant portion of August was wasted as Hitler and his advisors argued about the next course of action after the initial victories. Another factor in Germany's situation was a political miscalculation. They believed that the Soviet regime would collapse within 3 to 6 months after the invasion due to a lack of internal support. Initial attack. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched the attack on the Soviet Union using 3 main army groups, similar to the invasion of France in 1940. In the north, one army group under the command of General Wilhelm von Lieb advanced from East Prussia into the Baltic countries, aiming for Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. In the south, another army group commanded by General Gerd von Rundstedt, with the support of an armored group under General Erich von Manstein, advanced from southern Poland into Ukraine, aiming for Kiev, and then continued southeast towards the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Finally, in the central area, north of the Pripyat marshes, the main army group commanded by General Fedor von Bock, with the support of armored groups under General Heinz Guderian and General Hermann Hoth, advanced northeast towards Smolensk and Moscow. In this way, Germany's campaign covered a large area from northern to southern Soviet Union, with the main objective of occupying important territories and destroying the Soviet military forces. On June 22, 1941, Germany unexpectedly invaded the Soviet Union on a wide front stretching 1,850 miles, 2,900 kilometers. This caught the Soviet leadership and Red Army off guard. In the southern sector under the command of General Bock, General Guderian's tanks quickly crossed the border and advanced towards Minsk, just 200 miles, 320 kilometers away, within a few days. In Minsk, they encountered General Hoth's tank forces advancing from the north. However, Bock's infantry was unable to keep up with the tanks to complete the encirclement of Soviet forces. Although 300,000 Soviet troops were captured, many others managed to escape to the east. Despite being isolated, the Soviet Red Army fought fiercely, unlike the French in 1940. When Guderian's tanks crossed the Dnieper River in early July and continued their march towards Smolensk, they captured an additional 200,000 Soviet prisoners. However, a large number of Soviet troops managed to break out of the encirclement and continued to organize strong resistance behind the German armored forces. By mid-July, heavy rains turned the roads in Russia into muddy quagmires, slowing down the German advance. The German forces also faced difficulties due to Soviet scorched earth policies. The Soviets burned crops, destroyed bridges, and relocated factories before the German troops arrived. Many important factories were dismantled and transported eastward to continue operations. The Soviets employed tactics of destroying or relocating a majority of their rail cars, rendering their rail system unusable by the Germans. This was largely due to the difference in rail gauge between the Soviet Union and Germany, making German rail cars unable to run on Soviet tracks. By mid-July, the German forces had advanced over 400 miles, 640 kilometers, and were only 200 miles, 320 kilometers away from Moscow. They still had ample time to achieve victory before winter set in, but ultimately lost this opportunity, primarily due to disagreements in August between Hitler and the German High Command about the objectives of the next offensive. While the German High Command wanted to focus on Moscow, Hitler wanted to move southeast through Ukraine and the Donets River Basin, advancing towards the Caucasus region with a smaller force heading northwest towards Leningrad to link up with General Lieb's army. In Ukraine, Generals Rundstedt and Kleist broke through the Soviet defensive system, although the Soviet defenses later became stronger. By the end of July, a new Soviet front south of Kiev was defeated, and in the following 2 weeks, the German forces advanced to the Black Sea coast along the Bug and Dnieper rivers, joining forces with the Romanian army. Afterwards, Kleist was ordered to move north from central Ukraine, and Guderian moved south from Smolensk to create an encirclement around the Soviet Union behind Kiev. By the end of September, this encirclement had captured 520,000 Soviet soldiers. These major failures were partly due to the Soviet commanders lacking skills and partly due to Stalin, as the supreme commander, disregarding the advice of the generals and ordering the army to stand firm and fight instead of retreating eastward and reorganizing for a counterattack. Attack on Moscow. As winter of 1941 approached, Hitler ordered General Lieb to halt his advance near Leningrad. He also ordered Generals Rundstedt and Kleist to advance eastward towards Donetsk and the Caucasus. Meanwhile, General Bock continued his offensive towards Moscow. Bock's new attack began on October 2nd. The initial large encirclement around Vyazma put heavy pressure on the Soviet forces, with 600,000 soldiers being captured. This created an apparent opportunity for the German forces to advance towards Moscow. However, the battle at Vyazma dragged on until the end of October, and the German forces grew tired, facing bad weather and muddy conditions. Fresh Soviet forces also appeared to block the German advance. Some German generals wanted to halt the offensive and find defensive positions for the winter, but Bock wanted to continue because he believed the Soviet Union was on the verge of collapse. This viewpoint was also agreed upon by Brauchitsch and Halder, two other senior military leaders. There was no opposition because this viewpoint aligned with Hitler's desires. The allure of Moscow was too great for the German leaders to resist. On December 2nd, another effort was made, and some German units advanced into the outskirts of Moscow. But the attack was hindered by the forests surrounding the capital. The harshest winter in decades in Russia had a severe impact on the German forces, with temperatures dropping below zero. The German troops lacked warm clothing, transportation, and their weapons froze, while the Soviet forces were well equipped and fought more effectively in the winter. By November, the German forces had suffered around 700,000 casualties, a large number unprecedented in previous campaigns against France and the Balkans. In the south, on November 22nd, General Kleist advanced towards Rostov-na-Donu, the gateway to the Caucasus region. However, upon arrival, his tanks ran out of fuel. General Rundstedt realized that this position could not be held and wanted to retreat, but Hitler disagreed. Eventually, the Soviet forces launched a counterattack and recaptured Rostov on November 28th, after which Rundstedt was relieved of his command. As the German offensive towards Moscow weakened, General Georgy Zhukov, the commander of the Moscow front of the Soviet Union, launched a major counteroffensive on December 6th. He attacked the right flank of Army Group Bach in the Yelnya and Tula areas south of Moscow, and the center of Army Group Bach in Klin and Kalinin, now Tver, in the northwest. The Siberian forces, specialized in operating in cold weather, were used for these attacks. Later, the Soviet forces also attacked the left flank of the German army in Velikiye Luki, and the counteroffensive expanded, lasting throughout the winter of 1941-1942 towards Smolensk. In reality, Germany's Barbarossa campaign had failed since August 1941, and this failure became evident when the Soviet counteroffensive began. Although the Soviet forces suffered heavier losses than the German forces, the fact that the Germans could not defeat the Soviet Union became a major deadlock, marking a turning point in World War II.